Hello everyone. Sorry that I have been so busy in the last few months and had no time to make videos, but I did make progress on some of the projects, and so today let's consider the following question. To check whether the engine is properly timed without disassembling it, it's convenient to have a so-called CKP-CMP correlation waveform, but this is not something that is often found in the service information. So, is it possible to use service information and look up how the reluctors look like and how the sensors work, and use that information to reproduce the CKP-CMP correlation waveform? Here I'm going to use a Subaru EJ253 engine as an example, and in the service information we can find the location of the crankshaft position sensor, the camshaft position sensor, and also how the reluctors look like. The service information for this engine provides a CKP-CMP correlation waveform, but in a somewhat stylized fashion. And also I have a picoscope capture, so we have something to compare our results with. Now let's proceed to the description of the crankshaft reluctor on this engine, so we can find this information, and it has an interesting shape. A standard crankshaft reluctor would have one tooth missing, but this one has one batch of two missing teeth, and the space is half filled in between, and on the other side you have two batches of two teeth missing, and again halfway filled. Very interesting. Also, we do not have on this diagram the timing mark, so we cannot be sure which way is up, which way is down. We can see the keyhole, but that's about it. So I couldn't find any better reluctor picture in the service information. However, when in the section where the timing belt change is described, I can see that the reluctor is located so that the two batches of two teeth missing is in the left top corner with the timing mark going straight up. I cannot see the key, so it must be somewhere pointing down, and I also see that the CKP sensor is not vertical, it comes in at an angle. And at this point I really need to have a picture of how it looks like. Luckily, if you go on the internet, on the forums, you can easily find a picture of this reluctor, and this picture has a lot of information in it. So we can see that the timing mark corresponds to this gap between the teeth, and the reluctor, the sensor itself looks at the 1, 2, 3, the third tooth on the reluctor. And if we look further, we can see that there is also a red triangle mark at 90 degrees from the timing mark, which turns out to be the TDC, top dead center of compression stroke for cylinder 1. This is very good information indeed. In the service information for this engine, I found no mention of this red triangle mark at all. However, in the service information for the previous generation of this engine, we can find that it is indeed so, that the piston position mark is 90 degrees from the timing alignment mark, even though the reluctor has actually a different shape, but the crankshaft sprocket is still very similar. Also, this picture shows us the camshaft sprocket, where we can see that the timing mark is also going straight up, with the TDC mark being 45 degrees clockwise from it, and it's no surprise because the camshaft moves at the speed twice slower than the crankshaft. So 90 degrees of the crankshaft matches 45 degrees for the camshaft. Okay, let's take a look at the picture of this camshaft sprocket that, of course, I also found on the internet. And indeed, we see that there is a timing mark pointing straight up, and then there is an arrow for TDC 45 degrees clockwise from the timing mark. And what turns out to be very important later on, there is some sort of a dowel pin that you can see over here. Now let's go back to the service information and see how the camshaft sprocket is described for the engine in question. So here is the front of the camshaft sprocket, and indeed we see the arrow that, if it's pointing straight up, corresponds to the top dead center of compression stroke for cylinder 1. Perfect. When it comes to the backside of the sprocket, there is a picture showing the bosses that trigger the CMP sensor. However, there are no timing marks, so we do not know where the TDC is or where the timing mark is. However, somehow they are showing this dowel pin, even though they didn't show it on the previous picture where they had the front of the sprocket shown. But we do know that the dowel pin corresponds to the arrow, and so I assume that on this picture, if we flip the sprocket to the other side, the arrow will be pointing straight up. Also, this picture doesn't tell us the exact location of the camshaft position sensor. In other places in the service information, we can find that it's approximately 45 degrees from straight up, but that's about it. And this is not precise enough for our purposes. So the only thing I can do is go back to the picture of the camshaft sprocket and see that, oh, this is where the camshaft position sensor is hiding. So I'll have to measure some angles and see what they are. Okay, now we have most of the information we need to create our CKP-CMP correlation waveform. And it's fairly straightforward from the mathematical standpoint, because all we need to do is just to take into account the rotation of the crankshaft and camshaft sprockets and the physics of the magnetic sensors. It involves some math, and instead of boring you with some trigonometry, I decided to make an online tool that will help us to do just that. And so here, let's go to the tool itself, and here we can specify our reluctor for the crankshaft position sensor. We need to input some values. So we already checked that our timing mark is going to be straight up, and it is 90 degrees after the TDC of compression stroke for cylinder 1. So I'm putting 90 degrees into this input box. To populate the reluctor, I first will use the preset for 35 plus 1 missing tooth, and then I will need to modify the reluctor reluctor pattern. So the rotation is clockwise, so everything, this is a good setting, but we need to make sure to reproduce the shape, the pattern of the teeth. And let's recall what it was. So what we need to do is to have a gap when we at the straight up position, and then we'll have 1, 2, 3 teeth, and then two missing again. So let's just put that right in. So I'm using this minus and plus to rotate the pattern around. So I rotated it once, and now I have a gap at the timing mark. Now we need to have 3 teeth, 1, 2, 3, good, and then we deselect 2 of them, put 1 in, deselect 2 again, and we kind of replicated what we see in this picture. However, we also have the 2 missing teeth on the other side. Remember, where we have this reluctor, we constructed this part, but 13 teeth after that, we have 2 teeth missing. So we need to count 13 teeth. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, and then deselect 2 more teeth. With that done, we should have 16 teeth on the other side, so let's just quickly double check that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. Alright, that's correct. And the last thing that we need to do is to specify where our sensor lives. And remember that on this picture, we had it pointing at the 3rd tooth, just pretty much half a tooth away from the timing mark. So let's put minus 10 degrees clockwise from straight up and see if our sensor moves into the right position. No, that's not the right position. We want to have it minus 5 degrees. And now it's in the right position. We are done with specifying what our CKP sensor and its reluctor are. Now let's proceed to specifying the CMP. We only have one CMP sensor, though the online tool supports up to 4. So now let's focus on the CMP. I will start with empty, no teeth at all, and we need to populate it again. So remember that we had it specified in the service information manual relative to TDC arrow pointing up, and we need to figure out the angles for those bosses that are triggering the CMP sensor. To do that, we need to go and load this image into, let's say, GIMP, or if you have access to Photoshop, you can use that one as well, because we need to measure the angles. So I'm going to select an angle measurement tool, and first I'm doing the straight up line, then I'm pressing Shift, and then measuring the angle for the boss, and it turns out to be 27 degrees. Now I'm going to move it to the other boss and see that it's 61 degrees counterclockwise. Now that we know these values, so what was that? We had 27 and 61 counterclockwise degrees. We need to put them into the tool, but remember, you have to be surgically precise with this information. Remember that this is actually the backside of the cam sprocket. So what we need to do first is to press on this front lettering, and it will flip the sprocket around, showing its backside. And now we need to populate the pattern at 27 degrees clockwise. You see on the right, top right corner in the brackets, it shows the angle relative to the clockwise from the straight up position. And so this is 27 degrees, all good. And also we need to put it at minus 61. And so here we go. We can now flip the sprocket back to the front side. Okay, one other thing that we should not forget is that this is relative to the arrow, which was pointing to TDC if it's pointing straight up, but we need to specify everything relative to the timing mark, which is 45 degrees different from the arrow. So what we really need to do is to take our measurements and move them 45 degrees clockwise from where they are right now. So here we have 60 degrees. That should become 60 plus 45, 105. So I'm using this plus to move the pattern clockwise until I'm getting the right angles. So 61 should become 106. Okay, right about now, let's double check. Yes, we have this pointing at 106. The other one moved as well, so it's where it should be. And the last thing that we need to specify is the sensor position. And this is where it gets somewhat tricky. Remember, from the service information, it should be at around 45 degrees, but this is only approximate. We can take a look at the picture and see where it is more precisely, even though it's not going to be a precise measurement anyway because of the perspective of the camera. The camera is looking a little bit downward on this sprocket, so the angles are misaligned somewhat. So let's open it in GIMP again. And use the management tool. What we will notice is that our 45 degrees arrow is actually about 42 degrees instead of 45. And our CMP sensor is around 39 degrees. So to correct 39 when 42 should actually be 45, it means that the 39 should become around 42. So this is exactly what I'm going to put into the sensor position, 42 degrees clockwise from straight up, and just hope for the best, because this is as precise as I can get from the pictures. Unfortunately, I cannot just go into service information and get the angle right from there. It's just not specified there. Okay then, now we have both CKP and CMP specified. Hopefully we didn't make any mistakes. And now it's just a matter of pressing plot, and it's going to work and create some sort of a pattern. Where we can see we have the batch of two where we had two missing teeth every time, and the falling edge in the middle lines up with the CMP falling edge. And then when we have the other falling edge for the CMP, it lines up with the falling edge for the CKP after the missing teeth region has passed. Now the question is, how did we do? So let's go to the information that we have in the service info, and here is the CKP-CMP correlation waveform. So, well, it's in a fairly stylized fashion, because every vertical line corresponds to the falling edge. And what we will see, let me just try to scale it so that it doesn't fill the whole screen. So we should have the 10 degrees before top dead center being at the fourth tooth falling edge, which means that the TDC will be on the fifth tooth. Do we actually have that? Let's count. So we have first falling edge, second, third, fourth, and fifth. So that matches. We actually identified the TDC correctly. Now the CMP, the signal should match the middle falling edge, and it does. And later on, the other CMP falling edge should match the falling edge in CKP after the missing teeth region is gone. So this looks like it matches fairly well. Now we can also try to compare that to the picoscope capture. So the picoscope capture that I have is collected by Hans Jorgensen for diag.net, and that's for a 2008 Subaru Outback that uses that EJ253 engine. And so to compare, let's first download the PDF that will contain both the waveform and the reluctors. So here we go. Maybe move it a little bit down. And then we can open the picoscope program and try to line up our captures. Okay, let's see if this lines up. Okay. Alright, so we have the CMPs lining up pretty well. For the CKPs, we have the notches in the proper places, except that the shape is somewhat different. Remember that for our case, we assume that we have a tooth or we don't have a tooth at all, while for the actual reluctor, they're kind of, the missing teeth are half filled, so they produce a more smooth pattern, just like you see here in the capture. But other than that, they are fairly similar, and the timing seems to be exactly the same. So this looks like a success, but I wouldn't call it that way, simply because we didn't find all the info in the service information. We had to go to the forums and check the actual pictures of reluctors and where the sensors are located. So if I only had the service information, I would not be able to reproduce this CKP-CMP correlation waveform exactly, or I would make some really bad mistake and would be 10 to 15 degrees off, which makes this waveform fairly useless. So I would say it's a really nice demonstration of how the CKP-CMP correlation is born, but when it comes to saying that it's a practical way of reproducing a CKP-CMP correlation, I cannot say just yet, unless you have some extra information that is not contained in the SI. It can get pretty tricky, and also just reliably getting it the first time, it's not that easy, because it's very easy to make a mistake in angles, whether it's a front side, back side, whether the rotation is clockwise or counterclockwise. I cannot claim that it's a success just yet, and maybe will have a limited use, but for whoever it can use that, I will make this tool available for techs very soon, so stay tuned.